Today is September 25th, 2024. This is episode 47 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over week 4 in the Big Ten in college football, which included a couple conference games, a couple non-conference games, and then we'll preview week 5, which, Joe, is a full slate of conference games. Now, that'll be exciting when we get there, but we got a lot to get to today, so why don't we get right into it. Friday night in Lincoln, Nebraska, we had a ranked Nebraska Cornhuskers team hosting a ranked Illinois Fighting Illini, and despite being heavy favorites, the Huskers went down. Luke Altmaier and Illinois win in overtime behind a stellar defensive effort, some pretty solid quarterback play by Luke Altmaier, but at the end of the day, while Raiola may be the better quarterback, Illinois is the better team at this point.
Yeah, Sean, and I think a big thing we looked at going into this was we talked about it. Brett Bielema, he's made his career off these kinds of games. Games where the other team's favored to win, games where his team's on the road, but there's some edge they have. And this time, we didn't really see the edge until overtime, Sean. Illinois just stayed in there. It kind of reminded me of, and I make this analogy a lot, but I stand by it. It kind of reminds me of Mark D'Antonio teams in the mid-2010s. They might not have been the more talented team, but they stuck in there just long enough, and at the right moment, they picked their spots. And unfortunately, if you're a Cornhusker fan, this is just the same story you've seen over and over again. Now, I do think the outlook on their season is a lot less grim than it was when they've lost to Illinois, like especially in 2021. So I don't think the outlook is as dark as years past. But I tell you, Sean, if you're a Nebraska fan, in the 10 years, this is the 10th year without Bo Pelini. Think about that. Without him, 0-8 in overtime games, haven't scored a point in those overtime games, and that's not even the tip of the ice. I mean, that's barely the tip of the iceberg. You get to the bottom of it, this is just the kinds of games. Nebraska's close. Nebraska really plays better and has the better of the play most of the way. And just some silly mistakes, some missed opportunities. I think they got a little too passive as they got past the 50 at times. And it came back to cost them. And I do think Matt Rule's doing a great job, but Brett Bielema outcoached him. And that even includes the last drive when Dylan Raiola got sacked twice for a loss of, I believe it was a net of 32 yards. Now, you can talk about the penalty all you want. The bottom line is, I don't think you could put a freshman in that situation. I thought they were running the ball not great, but it was to a point where they could have at least used it once in overtime. But after Raiola took that 19-yard sack, the game was practically over. So really good by Illinois, really impressed by Brett Bielema. Clearly, they got a big one ahead, as we're going to talk about. Nebraska in a nice rebound spot, I think. So, hopefully for Raiola's sake for the future, the lessons learned, and for Illinois, this was certainly a huge win. Not one that I don't think neither of us were surprised by, but maybe a lot of the nation was. But if you were in Big Ten country, knowing Bielema and Nebraska, I think this was kind of the perfect formula coming into fruition.
Yeah, Joe, this game for me never seemed like Nebraska was going to lose. It seemed they were first to score. They never really pulled away, but they weren't losing. After in the second, third, or fourth quarters, and then they ended up just you give up a touchdown overtime, you don't get one, and it's unfortunate for Nebraska because this would have been a really nice opportunity to kickstart your season, and you have a couple winnable games ahead, but they stubbed their toe here. I don't think Dylan Raiola played bad. He's still a really good quarterback, but the key is Luke Altmaier played well enough, and the rest of Illinois is better than the rest of Nebraska, and that's why they won this road game. Pat Bryant, we got to shout him out. Another huge game for him. 5 catches for 74 yards and 2 scores. Joe, he is becoming one of the best receivers in the Big Ten. He's got 6 touchdowns already. He's certainly someone who can do some damage for Illinois. Obviously, that makes it a lot easier for Luke Altmaier to be good when you have a good receiver. And then something that I didn't really see coming is this Illinois defense being this good. To hold Nebraska to just 24 points, including an extra overtime drive that started on your own 20, or that started on the other team's 25. Defense got them across the line here, and boy, will they need it next week.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later, Sean. But some things to fix, but overall, the plays were made. And for Nebraska, man, at some point that has to break, you figure, right?
So, Joe, before we move on, these Friday night kickoffs, there's going to be one almost every week. What are your thoughts on them? I don't mind them, to be honest. They usually end up watching most of the game, and uh, the Big Ten has that slot on Fox, so you're going to see a lot more of it.
I think it's pretty interesting, Sean. I was in Ohio on Sunday at a youth football game, and a lot of those players have siblings, high school ball and whatnot. I I think if you're into high school football, like it's pretty big in Ohio, pretty big where I am in Metro Detroit. You get the younger generation missing out on some of the they're gonna miss out on one or the other, whether it's the high school or the Friday night. But I think most of the games are not premier action, so it's not as huge a deal. I do think if you're a real diehard college football fan, they've been very interesting. I think this one for conference play, Illinois, Nebraska is a heck of a way to kick it off. I'm very excited for Washington and Rutgers this week. Maybe not as like high ranked a matchup for the two teams, but certainly a fascinating one. And the next week, Oregon, Michigan State. Those are two big brands. I'm not going to feign that Michigan State's expected to keep it competitive, but I do think the Big Ten having a slot on Friday is definitely a strategic move, money wise, and whatever you make of that. It's not bad to have some scouting opportunity or like if you're a college football sicko to have something on a Friday night that relates to you if you're a Big Ten fan.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing really else on it. MLB playoffs are coming soon, but I've watched most of the Friday games. They're 8 o'clock. I don't know if when those when West Coast teams are there, if it'll be later. So yeah, the Oregon game is at 9 o'clock. So um, we'll see how it goes. But I'm pretty content with them so far. They've been good games, even going back to the Duke and Northwestern game a couple weeks ago. They've been pretty competitive. So Joe, we'll turn the page to Saturday. We had a number of non-conference games here, but we're going to start off with a conference one. That's your Michigan Wolverines. They get the job done against USC, led by quarterback Alex Orji, who could be confused with Tim Tebow if we go back a decade, but nope. 32 passing yards is all it took for Michigan to get the job done. They led early. They threw the first punch like we talked about they had to do if they wanted to win. They did stub their toe with a Donovan Edwards fumble late and actually did relinquish the lead, but they come down the field led by Khalil Mullings running the ball, and on fourth and goal with 37 seconds left, they punch it in and get the job done. Season-changing W for the Wolverines.
Yeah, just to make light of the Mullings thing. If you're a Michigan fan, that was probably a full circle moment for your relations with Khalil Mullings. He's very infamous for that very terrible fumble. There's no other way to put it at the 1 inch line against TCU in the playoff in 2022. Kind of came into his own as Donovan Edwards faded away and then faded back into the light from October last year to the national title game. And this was his moment. I don't know if this cements him as RB1. I think a lot of people expect it to. I think that's just getting caught up in the moment too much. What I can say is I think Michigan has figured out their identity, which is the identity a lot of people wanted them or expected them to have, and perhaps it took them the better month of September to figure it out. But boy, did they ever. And I'll give both points of view of this, and certainly the USC fans as well. Since I was at the game, I heard theirs, and I thought it was pretty practical. Michigan, you just beat a top 10, effectively a top 10 team. Your one loss is to the number one team in the country, who, let's face it, Sean, we're not an SEC podcast, but I look at Texas's schedule. Aside from the game against Georgia, you have Red River in there. Oklahoma has a lot of things to figure out. I'd be hard-pressed to find more than one loss on Texas's schedule, which my point will be the worst Texas can be in my book is like a number 5 team come playoff time.
And they're five of the top 6 are SEC teams, and Texas is better than all. They top the lot right now.
Yeah, so certainly you got your rear end handed to you by Texas, but I could argue most of the Big Ten, maybe outside of Ohio State or Oregon, maybe a Penn State, will probably get the same result, if not worse, by Texas. So I think Michigan, this is real big for their season. It keeps it alive, playoff hopes alive, certainly. They probably would have had to win out, which includes at Ohio State and versus Oregon had they lost. So kind of gives them a little breathing room. I think the schedule heads manageable up to Illinois, and that's on October 19th, almost 4 weeks from now, so we're not going to talk about it too much. USC, I do think they did a lot of positive things. I think they had the better of the play from right after the Edwards second TD, where it was 14-0. I thought USC deserved to win the game from that point on. And Lincoln Riley touched on it in his press conference the other day, Sean. Aside from the 4 runs, which sounds silly because you could make that claim about a lot of games, they defended Michigan's rushing attack very well. It's just the chunk plays, 63 yards, 46 yards, and a 41-yarder, and also the pick six where Will Johnson completely fooled Miller Moss. That's what really did them in. I think USC, unfortunately for them, they got behind against Michigan. That's what we said, Sean. If Michigan gets ahead, coming back against them with their style of play is really hard to do and to win the game. I know USC came all the way back. I do want to credit Miller Moss. You look at the 28 of 51 and you think he didn't play well. The guy was under duress on 47% of his dropbacks, which is ridiculous. And he got out of like at least 3 sacks where the guy had hands on him and delivered completions on 2 of those 3. And for USC, you're disappointed by the result. Certainly, I don't think after the second quarter you could have been that disappointed with the effort nor the execution. That was just an all-time great college football game. And for them, you have a win against the top 15, perhaps a top 12 team come year's end. And the schedule ahead's pretty manageable outside of Penn State and Notre Dame, both of which you have at home. There are very few games on here that I think they'll be favored to lose. And in fact, I bet one of those Penn State or Notre Dame games they'll be favored to win. So USC wins out or even loses one more game, they're certainly going to be in the conversation come Selection Day.
Yeah, so Joe, there's a couple of things I want to get to here. First off, Miller Moss took his team all the way back in potentially a top 5 environment in college football. And they haven't had a true road game yet this year. You can, LSU in Vegas, neutral, whatever. But he gave them a chance to win. He can't defend the run. He's the quarterback. So he did. Both losing quarterbacks that we've talked about so far today played well enough to win, and the rest of the team just let him down. But in terms of Michigan, Joe, defensively, it was a different team than the Texas game, and I know Texas is better than USC, but USC's offense is pretty good too. And Wink dialed up some different looks. Miller Moss is a good quarterback. He did struggle at times, but that's what gave them a chance, right? You're not going to win a shootout if you're Michigan in 2024. It's just not going to happen. But their defense gave them a chance. Obviously, the pick six is big. And Michigan's going to have to play mistake-free football to be the potential top 10 team at the end of the year. I know Donovan Edwards fumbled and basically gave USC a touchdown, but you talk about the pick six, so it was essentially a tie there on mistakes. But Michigan, Joe, how sustainable is winning this sort of game? In the age of the old 4-team playoff, I'd say you're probably cooked because you're probably not going to beat Ohio State, and that 2-loss Michigan would not be enough to get into the top 4. But in the age of the 12-team playoff, Joe, you win your games except for Ohio State, I think you're probably going to be in there. And you think that has something to do with it, that you don't have to be top 4 anymore? Because certainly Michigan is going to beat a lot of teams running the ball. USC's held up fairly well to the physicality of the Big Ten. And even in LSU, I thought they were the more physical team against them. So while they did sort of meet that criticism that they might have, they still lost the football game. But USC probably in the spot that you'd expect them to be with their schedule. And then you can say the same to Michigan, too. USC, look, this is probably their toughest game of the year. They gave a really good effort at it, especially in the second half. You end up coming short. And, Joe, looking at their schedule, I don't think they have another game that they should lose all year.
Yeah, and I'm just going to, a couple of things in there I'll touch on and try to answer all those questions, which I know a lot of the viewers have asked me. I'm going to try to take homerism aside, Sean. Michigan's upcoming schedule. Home against Minnesota this Saturday, at Washington, at Illinois, which will be a very challenging game based on what we just talked about, Michigan State, and then Oregon. So you have 4 games. You have essentially a month to get ready for Oregon, and 4 games that you're going to probably be favored in.
I think the Illinois game might be tougher than the Oregon game at this point.
I'll reserve judgment on that till the week of, until I see Illinois play Penn State and Ohio State play Oregon. But regardless, Sean, so long as Michigan runs the ball efficiently and doesn't turn the ball over, with that defense, it's going to be really hard to beat them. And I'll say it right now, minus one of the stupid turnovers, whether that's the Edwards fumble, which he rarely fumbles ever, and Kenneth Grant probably
There's
having
an
one of the top 5 dumbest plays in the history of college football. And I know he's a great player. He'll be a first round draft pick. That was an all time stupid play. Do you agree, Sean?
which one are you talking about? The fumble? Because I thought it was a great play to actually get it free. I don't think Edwards did a whole lot wrong.
No, I mean the big defensive lineman, Kenneth Grant, getting the ball, fumbling, getting the ball,
Oh
getting the
yes,
fumble,
yes,
running back. Yeah,
yes.
having Woody Marks.
That
Like,
is
come
just a
on.
freak play. I mean,
Yeah.
you gonna tell the guy not to try and run it back?
Honestly, I would have tackled the guy if I was one of Michigan's defenders because there was no way that was going to end in a touchdown. But anyway, Sean, getting back on track, Michigan and USC are positioned very well. Michigan, maybe not to win out, certainly not to win out, but they have 4 games before Oregon to get things sorted out. And I think Illinois is a really nice litmus test beforehand, too. Michigan State being a rivalry game in between, I don't think they're going to slack that week. So, kind of where they want to be, ranked number 12 in the AP poll. I think if the CFP poll came out today, it wouldn't be so different. Maybe they'd be anywhere 12 to like 14 at worst. So, uh, I don't think it's sustainable long term to win every game, but if Michigan's goal was to go 9-3 this year and maybe be in the conversation, especially if you beat an Illinois team that might be a top 15 team, and then you lose close to Oregon and Ohio State, you might be in the conversation. But I think this is going to be a week by week process for the Wolverines, being the younger team they are.
And at this point, you've got a ton of good teams on the schedule. You have Washington, who might be ranked at some point this year, Indiana, who might be ranked at some point this year. So we think the committee is going to take strength of schedule into account, especially with it looking now like it's going to be the 5 champions and then 7 teams from the SEC and the Big Ten to finish up the 12. Strength of schedule is going to be huge when it comes to dicing up who's 6th and 7th and 8th. So, Michigan is in a good spot in that regard if they can win some of those football games. But, Joe, we'll move on because there's a bunch of other games we need to get to. UCLA goes down to Baton Rouge. We didn't think it would be much, but credit to them. They did actually put together a pretty nice first half. They were tied with the Tigers at the break, but LSU pulls away in the second half, ending up winning by 17. That is about where the spread had it. UCLA, after a really embarrassing home loss to Indiana, at least provides themselves a decent account, at least a good half. Now, that's not why you play college football. You don't play college football for good halves, but they do go down there and give themselves at least a chance to win against the SEC-ranked team on the road.
Yeah, I think you kind of got to build off this. This is a young upstart program, and I'd say that not because they just started, obviously, but because of where they're at recruiting-wise, NIL-wise, and with this current roster. The schedule don't get any easier for the Bruins, Sean. You got Oregon, you got at Penn State. Minnesota, I'll call that the John Wooden Bowl for people who know the John Wooden phone call and the snowstorm story. So I think in those 2 games before the Minnesota game, they're probably just going to want to improve. Maybe they could give Oregon a scare. I don't think the game at Happy Valley is going to be particularly interesting. I think getting Ethan Garbers more comfortable, figuring out what they're doing in the running game, more balanced this time. I do think they can build off that. I just think for UCLA's sake, they have to, in a different way than Michigan or an Iowa, they really have to get the lead first, just before they dig themselves too deep a hole. There's no politically correct way to say it, Sean.
And we are doing our power rankings next week as we try to get back into 2 days a week before hoops starts. One of those will be power rankings. They're still probably going to come in at the bottom or near the bottom, but at least Garbers looked okay. Indiana's not 29 points on the road better than UCLA, and LSU is probably about 17 points at home better than UCLA. So at least you did what you were supposed to do here. And you're probably going to have to play that well or better to get some wins coming up here, as you already alluded to. Rutgers at Virginia Tech, Joe. The Big Ten gets a non-conference win. Not a common theme this week. The Scarlet Knights get the job done against the Hokies on the road, 26-23. It was all Rutgers early. They led 23-7 after the third quarter, but Vatek came back to tie it, and then a Patel field goal with just under 2 minutes left gave Rutgers a 3-point lead. Callie McManus, 269 passing yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. Kyle Monagai on the run, 84 yards and a touchdown, and Samuel Brown, the fifth, 60 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. So Rutgers, leaning on the run, gets the job done against an ACC opponent.
Yeah, I really think Anthony Kaliakmanis came in here. I think Gavin Wimsatt is very talented. I do hope he finds some role at Kentucky that's a lot better for him than it was at Rutgers, because toward the end it got really difficult to watch. Kaliakmanis, simply put, Sean, he could just put them in position to win. Game manage, that's the action you would use. I think it's more kind of, hey, I'm just gonna do my job. I'm gonna put it out there.
Well, and you're the better team. That's all you need to do, and they were here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think this is the first time we're big fans of Greg Schiano on this show. New Jersey guy, certainly love the energy he's brought back to Rutgers, especially in this second stint. This was a game he almost choked away, going for it on up 23-7. I understand being aggressive, and that's a lot of the program's mindset. Greg's a defensive guy. If you get a 26-7 lead there, I'm hard pressed to believe he would give that up or even come close to giving that up. I understand 16 and 19 points. That's 2 and 3 scores, Sean. We all know what 2 and 3 scores, especially the second half, mean. And I'll put it this way, Sean. In Blacksburg, having to sustain a lead and then take the lead back, it shows a lot of character for Rutgers. I'm hesitant to say it's all a credit to them because they shouldn't have been in a situation like that anyway. So unlike a lot of the optimistic Rutgers fans, I do think that's a behavior that can't be repeated. I'm not saying it's going to. I just hope they like touch the fire once, and like little Jimmy did down the road when you were younger. Touched it once, his mom yelled at him, and he never did it again, because certainly they don't want to find that out. Like we touched on, Sean, a big game on Friday against Washington. I do think that's one of the bigger games in Rutgers' recent history. Not because of any rankings, just more to show that they can beat the teams. Probably a lot of people view Washington, maybe the overall program historically, certainly in a higher place than Rutgers, but currently 2 teams kind of in the purgatory of the middle of the Big Ten. And I think if Rutgers wins that, it would make them, it's a really good indication of where the program's at. Perhaps it's a sign of even better things to come, because he's made that program a lot better since the fire of Chris Ash. No denying it.
Yeah, where they, we'll talk about that game later, but that's going to have a huge influence on where I put them in the rankings. This was the first game where I've watched them, and I've watched pretty much every team at least once. But I mean, you could probably argue for them as high as 7th, maybe 8th. And then you could also put them down at 14th, because they played nobody, and they almost choked away a game to a team that lost to Vanderbilt. So it's a big one. These middle of the pack Big Ten clashes are going to be huge when it comes to standings at the end of the year, because there's not many games and there's a lot of teams. We saw it in basketball last year. The difference between 12-8 and 8-12 was 9 seed lines. It's going to be even more so like that in football. And these middle versus middle games, Rutgers at home, Washington probably a little bit better of a team, should be really close to even. Now, the team that they are playing next week, Joe, the Washington Huskies, they take down Northwestern 24-5. This game was over pretty quickly. The Huskies were up 17-2 at halftime, and they end up just getting a touchdown to a Northwestern field goal in the second half. Will Rogers impresses 220 yards and 2 passing touchdowns. Washington's defense gives Northwestern nothing, really. We asked for the Huskies to win this game pretty convincingly. That's exactly what they've done, as they look to bounce back, or they did bounce back from that tough loss to Washington State.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to process here. First, Washington, congratulations. I believe they are the first new member to have a Big Ten win, because Oregon doesn't have one yet, USC doesn't have one, and UCLA certainly doesn't have one.
There you go.
So hats off to the Huskies for that. I think this is a phenomenal performance from the defense. I I do hesitate in saying that only because Northwestern was morbid offensively. They could not get Bryce Kurtz the ball. They could barely get AJ Henning the ball. I mean, 8 of 27. That's not going to get it done, even against Miami of Ohio, who Northwestern did struggle to beat. Before we rip Northwestern too much, I do want to shout out Will Rogers again. Very efficient. I'm so impressed with Jed Fish. I've always been, from the time he went from the Jaguars offensive coordinator to the Michigan passing game coordinator to UCLA, Arizona. The guy simply put, Sean, he loves efficiency. You could tell. He hates turnovers. Will Rogers, the biggest knock on him at Miss State, reckless with the ball, cowboy, a true product of the pirate Mike Leach's system, just complete and utter insurgent chaos. And at Washington, he looks like and I mean this in a really complimentary way. He looks like a polished, like system quarterback, except he has the talent to take him above that, and he's certainly done that. He gets playmakers the ball. He relies on Jonah Coleman in the running game. This is the first time they haven't needed Giles Jackson to do too much. Denzel Boston, 7 receptions for 121 yards, 2 TDs, a few long receptions in there too. This is a team that's not afraid to try and, if they succeed, take that top off of defense. And I do think that's something Rutgers and Michigan, their next two opponents, are definitely going to study. And Will Rogers, man, he's not afraid to run either. So I think Washington, I think a lot of people are going to look at the Washington State game and say that this is like the limitation of what Washington can do. I do the exact opposite, Sean. I think they're playing a little looser now. I think they know what their capabilities are. This is a team, again, a lot of guys who've never really played with each other, let alone practice with each other. So I think they're going to progressively get better, and this offense under Jed Fish, like it has in all of his other stops, it's going to progress, and it's progressed in the last 2 weeks in a way that it's just one of the more efficient offenses that I've seen. So I don't think they're going to take too many crazy risks. I think they're going to take calculated risks. That's what Jed Fish has been about most of his career. And this coaching matchup between Jed Fish and Greg Schiano, two guys who've certainly been around the business, been both in the NFL and college, done their fair share of play calling. This is going to be fascinating. I know Washington and Rutgers have played each other in the past. I believe it was 2017, but first time at like a Friday night environment. I bet Piscataway's going to be rocking. Uh, you know, the performances from both these teams going into this game indicates a fascinating game.
And Joe, next up we got Iowa knocking off Minnesota, avenging their tough loss from last year. Minnesota was winning by a touchdown at halftime by the score of 14-7, but Caleb Johnson takes over in the second half. Minnesota doesn't score a point, and Iowa ends up with another 30-point offensive outing. They beat the Gophers 31-14. They pick up a road win. Cade McNamara does the job, managing just 62 yards passing, but Caleb Johnson eclipses the 200-yard mark and 3 touchdowns, which got him on our Heisman watch list earlier today if you follow the Instagram. But, Joe, Iowa's defense is good as it usually is, and they found somebody who could be a superstar on offense. Not a surprise that they're winning games now.
No, and it's funny. A lot of people were surprised by our post, and certainly not our only. This is not the only fan page in the country that had Caleb Johnson in the top 10 of the Heisman voting. It was multiple, and a lot of people were like, Iowa offensive player, that itself should negate Caleb Johnson. I argue the exact opposite. The fact an Iowa offensive player is on there should probably discount them like 5 spots. If he's at 8, he should be at 3. Jokes aside, Sean, this is the first time Iowa's had an explosive playmaker like this on offense. And I know they've had the tight ends. They've had, currently they have a Luke Lachey. They've had Sam Laporta's, TJ Hawkins. I mean, you name it, Sean. They've had him. Point is, this is the first time they've had an electric running back. I thought TJ Goodson was good for them from 19 to 21 in that stretch. But this guy, Caleb Johnson, he's as electric as they come. And the fact they haven't had to use Luke Lachey that much while Caleb's been going off. Luke Lachey, 3 receptions for 9 yards. Cade, 11 for 19. This is funny, Sean. Both Michigan quarterbacks this week kind of won. They combined for 94 passing yards. So if you should be betting the overs on Cade McNamara or Alex Orji passing, and if you did, you might be a fool. But regardless, this is really good from Iowa. They limited Minnesota's rushing game. I think Darius Taylor and Marcus Major are two. I think they're top end running backs in this conference. I'm going to say it, Sean. I'm not going to let one performance affect that. And they were a non-factor the entire game. Outside of one long run from Darius Taylor, I think his other 9 runs, he got like 17 yards, so barely got 2 a carry. So Iowa, this is textbook Iowa, and now that their offense is not being a net negative, it's actually somewhat looking up to be a positive. 1-0 in the conference, and like a USC, a very favorable schedule ahead. For Minnesota, I think the good news for you is that you're playing a team that's going to try to beat you the same way Iowa beat you. So either that's your kryptonite or you buckle down and figure it out. So a lot to take away from. I think a lot more to take away from Iowa. Minnesota, more questions than answers. I think that pass protection also has to do a lot better job protecting Max Prosper, even though he can get away. So uh, good on Iowa. I do think the Iowa State loss is overblown as well, not only because it's a interstate rivalry, but they controlled most of that game, Sean, and really choked it away. So if you're Iowa, you should be 4-0, but the biggest thing is you're 1-0 in the conference. And, uh, this week, I think you better just be prepping the entire week before you play Ohio State. Since you're on the bye, you should be watching exclusively Ohio State. Don't worry about any of your other games because it's going to take all hands on deck to win that game next week.
Yeah, Iowa very similar to Michigan, and sort of a microcosm of the game of football as a whole. I think with the NFL and college, running the ball, being physical, that is coming back. If it's not, has already came back. You look at all the good teams in the NFL, they all run the ball effectively. You look at all the good teams in college, they run the ball effectively. You look at the teams that have lost games that they shouldn't in college, it's because they can't run the ball effectively. So, it's not the 1940s anymore, but you can win Big 10 football games in the year 2024 by having a really good rushing attack. And Michigan and Iowa have proven it. Minnesota does get another chance at essentially the same style, Joe, but Michigan's probably a little better at it than Iowa is, and they got smoked on their own patch to Iowa. So could be tough for the Golden Gophers there. Now we've got two more games, non-conference losses in the Big Ten. Michigan State loses at Boston College. They had control of this one, but at the end of the day, Aiden Childs plays them out of the game. 3 interceptions, and BC picks up a 23-19 victory. Joe, not a lot of expectations coming into the year for Michigan State. Aiden Childs was expected to struggle, but the rest of the team is performing a lot better than we thought, and they did enough to win this game, but unfortunately, you have to say it, the quarterback play did drag them underneath and eventually enough for the loss.
Yeah, I do want to mention that Aiden Childs wasn't the only one to turn the ball over. Fumble by K'Ron Lynch-Adams certainly wasn't helping them. I want to shout out Michigan State's front seven. It's been great. Chris Bogle, Malik Spencer, Cal Halliday. It seems like he just never graduates or never leaves. And I mean that complimentary as a Michigan fan. I do think the addition of Ed Woods from Arizona State this offseason was huge. He played a great game as well. Shot, there's no other way to put it. Aiden Childs, I think, especially as the NIL check has cleared, he is your program. And he's done some phenomenal things. I mean, that scramble he had in this game, and for people who didn't watch it, that's Justin Fields-esque. Or that's like when Caleb Williams was a freshman, he had some scrambles against Texas and Oklahoma State where you're just jaw-dropped. And he still has that ability. The 3 interceptions did not change that. I think the worst throw he made was the one where like the 2 BC defenders collided with each other because that could have been picked by both of them, and it almost was simultaneously. That ball could have like snapped in half, and they would have had one half of it each. I think he's going to have to get that under control at some point. Truthfully, I don't think that's a quick fix. I do think he's going to get a lot better. I do think by next year he's going to be a top 6 quarterback in this 18-team conference. I think that's a pretty safe assumption. The guy has loads of talent. This is his first year as a starter. And to be very fair to him, the injuries are like racking up on Michigan State's offensive line. I believe they're down to their like 3rd string right guard. And as their next few weeks approach, as you see that daunting 4-game stretch we've so often talked about in the offseason and as we've discussed Michigan State, This loss is going to hurt only because those games follow. I do think you look at that 3-1 stretch, the fact they got one of the road games at Maryland and Boston College, I do think that's an accomplishment. And another thing to mention, Sean, without a Nick Marsh in this game, I do think he could take off the top. He could take the top off of a defense better than a Montorie Foster. So, uh, Michigan State really disappointed only because you played well enough to win this game and you had the lead late, surrendered a late TD. But if you repeat this performance minus the turnovers, you're going to be competitive in a lot of games. Now, it might not get you competitive in your next 2 games or maybe your next 4 games, but getting back to a bowl game is certainly still on the table. And I think they're still way on track to do that.
We didn't think the rest of the team would be this good, so Michigan State fans would probably be okay with these growing pains for Maiden Childs. But Joe, if they win this game, they might be ranked this week, and we
Yeah.
talked about that last week, and that was a very real possibility. And it's just a shame because I think Childs will be a good quarterback too. It's not going to be this year. It might not even be next year. You might have to wait with Childs for a little bit, but the potential is there. But unfortunately, a little bit too gung ho in this one, and he ends up losing his team the game. To be fair, but Boston College is a good team, and you almost went in there and won. So, props to Michigan State for handling business for most of the game there. Joe, the other Big Ten team that lost did not do that. That would be Purdue, coming off of the embarrassing loss to Notre Dame. It was more of the same for the Boilermakers. Oregon State wins 38-21. This game was over early, and Oregon State had no trouble really. Hudson Card just managing 56 passing yards and a touchdown, and Oregon State cruises in this one against Purdue.
Yeah, I think the one positive is Devin Mockaby continues to prove he's a great running back. Aside from that shot, brutal from Hudson Card, 56 yards. He joins the sub 100 club with Cade McNamara and Alex Orchard. Unfortunately, of the three, he's the only one that took a loss, and albeit a huge one. Purdue, kind of like UCLA, I think they gotta just lick their wounds. Both of them a week ago got absolutely slaughtered. This week, the slaughtering wasn't as bad. And now you both have home games against teams you're certainly not favored to compete with, let alone beat. So I think maybe a glimmer of hope for one of these teams is coming. I'll bet you this, Sean. In those 2 games we're going to preview, I bet one of them is going to be a lot closer than we think. And that could be really broad because, if you keep it within 14, I think it could be that. I don't think these teams are as terrible. They each have some nice pieces, particularly Purdue. I think Hudson Card played high-level football for Texas at a time. He made some nice throws for Purdue this year and last year. And Devin Mockaby's a guy most teams in this conference, minus maybe like a Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon, would gladly take on their team if they could swap. So uh, hopefully they'll build off something. I don't know what, but hey, it's college football. There's a reason these games are played, and I've certainly seen bottom tier Big Ten teams put the fear of God into some contenders on any given week.
Yep, tough for Purdue. We looked for anything really positive after how poorly last week went. And Joe, with the caliber of opponent in mind, this wasn't much better to be beaten by that much to a team in a game that was supposed to be close. All right, we'll move to the Week 5 preview now as we hit the 40-minute mark. Washington at Rutgers Friday night, Joe. We've talked about this a lot. Rutgers -2.5 Friday night. This game is a springboard for both teams if they want to get to where they want to get.
Yeah, I think this is going to be the ultimate coaching battle and complementary football matchup, Sean. I think there are 2 playmakers on each team I want to watch. Number one, Kyle Monangai goes without saying for Rutgers. When you talk about Rutgers' offense, if he doesn't come up, you've clearly never watched Rutgers. And for Washington, it's 2 weapons. It's Will Rogers and a Giles Jackson. And a Jonah Coleman, too. So I guess 3. I think the fact Rutgers has to care about 3 weapons for Washington, I do think Washington can play a pretty standard defense against Athen Kalagmanis. I do think selling out against the run would be risky for Washington, only because Kalagmanis has seen the field a lot better at Rutgers than he did at Minnesota. And with Kirk Shiraka there, I do think he has more of a comfortability than he's ever had, especially more so than he had at Minnesota. So with that, Sean, if I'm going to make a pick of this game, give me Rutgers. I do think the spread of 2.5, maybe a little light. I think Rutgers wins a 24 to 23 to 17 football game. I think it goes down to the wire. I do think Rutgers' defense stands up Washington a few more times than Jed Fish likes. Perhaps Jed Fish gets a little aggressive being on the road, and I do think Kyle Monangai has a few enough big runs to ice the clock for Rutgers. So give me the Scarlet Knights by 6 at home in a huge game for Rutgers and a huge win for the Scarlet Knights. That perhaps gets them thinking about bigger goals than just getting to 6 to 8 wins.
Yep, I've got Rutgers by a field goal, Joe. And the last time I did predict the home team to win by a field goal, it was right, as Michigan won by a field goal. had to remind everybody there.
Oh, of course.
And I think it'll come down to who doesn't make mistakes, all the cliches with tight, tough football games. And Rutgers being the home team, I'm going to give them the slight edge here. The first of 3 noon games, or that Friday night game was on Fox, by the way. We already alluded to that, but just again. Now, the Saturday noon game on Fox, Joe, Minnesota goes on the road to visit your Michigan Wolverines. Both teams, we talked about what they had to do last week. Michigan at -9.5 to start off this one. Big win last week. Can't be a letdown spot here.
No, Sean, and that's the biggest worry for Michigan. This is the first time they've received the amount of positive press they have since probably, I don't know, August, when everyone was just talking about how great the defensive line was and how Donovan Edwards is the cover athlete on the NCAA football game. Because after Texas, this team got humbled. And after Arkansas State, that humbling continued. This is the first week they felt good about themselves. I do think with a veteran group, as proven by their fight in the USC game, I do think they treat this as a very workmanlike game. I don't think you're going to see anything too crazy. I doubt you're going to even see a flea flicker. I do think they'll incorporate maybe 4 or 5 more passing plays for Alex Orji, because I do think he's a guy that you're going to have to continue to feed him stuff slowly. So give me Michigan. Let's call it the over-under is 35.5. That's like an Iowa over-under. Yeah. So yeah. I do think that there's a reason for that. I'll pick Michigan to win this game, a very obscure score. Give me the Wolverines, score of 24-12. How Minnesota gets 12, maybe they get
4 field goals, 2 touchdowns.
No,
or 1 touchdown, 2 field goals? Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. 24-12. I think they double them up and they cover that. Currently a 9.5 on whatever sports book. Could go anywhere 8.5 to 9.5. So give me the Wolverines. I do think they'll run just well enough. And I think Minnesota might break off a few runs, but running against Michigan's front 7 is not the easiest thing in the world, as they'll come to find out.
Yeah, the key to this one is Michigan needs to sustain the level of play that they did against USC. Now, it's easier said than done, but bring it defensively, make it tough for Minnesota, make them triple and quadruple option on their throws, and the defense should be fine if they bring the effort. Now, offensively, I would just like to see Orji throw 1 bomb. It doesn't even matter if it's an incomplete pass. Just show him that you got it. He's got good arm strength, reportedly. So just maybe it doesn't matter if it's an incomplete pass. Just show him that you can do it, and then run the ball with the same intensity that you did against USC, and you should roll here. Now, you know, if the defense doesn't quite bring it, there's a way that this game can be closer than it should be, but I've got Michigan by 14 also. I'm not going to advise anybody to take Michigan's spread at this point, but I do think they should win this game. It will probably end up being a score or 2 more than it actually feels like, but if Michigan is serious about doing well this year, got to keep the levels at where they were last week. The second noon game, Maryland visits my Indiana Hoosiers, 4-0, not ranked, the first or second team out that received votes. Maryland soul-searching their season as they are 3-1. They have picked up a couple nice victories over some weaker non-conference opponents, but they did lose the home game to Michigan State. Indiana, after smoking UCLA, did beat Charlotte 52-14 last week, Joe. Hoosier Nation gets to see a home Big Ten team led by Curtis Rourke. They're -7. Got to think that the Hoosiers should take care of business here if they're as good as we think.
Yeah, Sean, and Kurt Signetti, man, if you've been an Indiana cover better, You really got to love this guy. So,
Yeah, they covered 28 last week easily.
yeah, this is an intensity and kind of an anger. And I mean, this complimentary, Sean, again, savageness I've never seen from an Indiana team. They do not give a bleep about who they play. His opening speech, if Indiana football ultimately turns this around and creates an era of whatever relevance to what their fans, whatever relevant level they're at, that speech on that Friday, December night is going to live in notoriety forever. They have the attitude of this coach. They run it well. Curtis Rourke is the best Big Ten quarterback you probably didn't expect to even talk about
I think he might be
as we
number
approach
one so
October.
far, Joe, in what we've seen this year. He has not been challenged one bit. Now, he hasn't played any good teams, but and he's a fifth-year senior. He's a conference player of the year and all that, but I'm curious to see where we put him in our quarterback power rankings next week. But he is the real deal. He's got good receivers, good running backs. How good is this defense? We're not going to know. We probably won't find out here, but this offense, at least so far, has been pretty formidable.
Yeah, Sean. I guess I'm just gonna pick for our sake of time. Give me Indiana in this game. I like them by a score of 34-20. I think Maryland does move the ball somewhat. I do think that they're limited in their passing game still. I think Indiana also is going to get ahead early, and Maryland might panic and throw a few interceptions. So, give me the Hoosiers to cover the current 7. I believe it is on most sports books. So, Cignetti's 4 for 4 with me so far, so I'm expecting him to go 5 for 5.
Yeah, it seems like, Joe, from the neutral point of view, now that's not me, as I am an Indiana fan, but the neutrals are rallying around Indiana and Kurt Cignetti. Now, I don't know if that's you guys are fun early on in the season thing. There's a lot of those teams, take Colorado last year, for example. But, there's a way this Indiana team is a lot better than we think, but it starts with a win here. You are better than Maryland. You have them at home. It's a noon kickoff on Big Ten Network. Win this game. Keep the offense rolling. Score first. And very much like it is tough to come back against Michigan's, the Iowas, it is tough to come back against Indiana because you know how hard it is to get stops. And when Indiana goes down at UCLA, scores, they fumble the first snap. Basically, they spot them a 14-0 lead. That was game over then and there. The way Maryland wins this is, maybe you get a couple turnovers and you make it ugly and you make it a game. And who knows what will happen because Indiana hasn't been in a game like that this year. It's been all clean and real easy. So what happens when they see their first sign of adversity will be how good this team is, whether they're an 8-4, 9-3 team, or whether there's 5-7, 6-6. The last noon game, Joe, on Peacock, Dylan Raiola and Nebraska look to bounce back from the Illinois loss as they head on the road to West Lafayette to play Purdue. Nebraska goes in there as double-digit favorites. At this point, Joe, there's not probably a better team on the schedule to have when you need a win rather than Purdue.
Yeah, short of a UCLA at home, yeah, I think that's spot on, Sean. I do think 10's really interesting.
That's a lot.
I thought it'd be more, to be honest. But regardless of what we agree with Vegas or whatnot, they make money off of guys like us for a reason. I think Dylan Raiola, I think just not getting in your own head is going to be the biggest thing. I think he has the swagger of the 5-star QB he's been, and I don't think one bad drive is going to affect that. Give me Nebraska in this 27-13. I think they somewhat cover. Although I will caveat with this, and I'm not going to take credit should it happen. When I mentioned Purdue and UCLA, one of them's due for a close game. This could be prime candidacy. If Dylan Raiola maybe panics a bit, if Nebraska loses confidence for whatever reason from that Illinois game, maybe this is the right time for Purdue to jumpstart their season. But I think Nebraska knows that, and they're going to be pretty careful, call a conservative game, and just let the fact that they're the better team ride out in the end.
Yeah, that's the key here. If Raiola goes in there and tries to do too much because his team lost the last game, that's how they get in trouble. They're the better team. He has to be as much of a game manager as he possibly can here, and they'll win this game rather easily. I'm going 23-10. I think they'll take it easy. It might be 10-7 at halftime or something, but he doesn't have to be a 5-star quarterback to win this game. All he has to do is move the ball and not turn it over, and they should be fine. And look for them to bounce back. It's a good spot for them, and see if they can get back in the W column. 3:30 on CBS, Joe. Wisconsin goes to Los Angeles to play USC. Wisconsin coming off of a bye. USC coming off the Michigan loss. They're minus 15.5 at home here. Wisconsin hasn't been great so far. USC in a bounce back spot. You'd have to like them to bounce back with a W after the tough loss at the Big House.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. That spread started off at 13.5. It's expanded to 15.5, and I think that's of the belief that USC is going to come out in this game not angry, probably just more eager to prove that. I think a lot of unfair criticism was directed their way that they were soft. By no means is USC soft. If you're down 14-0 in the Big House and you have control, they had control of that game until Kalel Mullings bursted that 63-yard run, which he broke like 3 tackles in. This is a very tough team that Wisconsin's not going to be excited to play after the bye, especially as Tyler Van Dyke is out for the year. If you're Wisconsin, this is a game you need to show me something, and that's really unfair to say. Playing Alabama week 3, similar to Michigan playing Texas week 2 as an upstart team, is really unfair. But Luke Fickell came in with some of the highest expectations for a football coach going into the 2023 season and into the 2024 season. He was hired at Wisconsin to be competitive in games like this. Eventually, he's going to have to win games like this. Unfortunately for him, I don't think this is it. Give me USC to win this game. I think they score quite a lot of this Wisconsin defense, only because I think it'll be out there a lot, and USC's defensive line is going to shut down Ches Malusi to a point where they're going to force Wisconsin to a lot of long third down situations. So give me the Trojans, not covering, but winning comfortably. Give me them at 35-21.
Yeah, I don't think they'll cover either. I just think Wisconsin will shorten the game enough to where there might just not be enough possessions to get to three possession win. You could see something like a 28-17 or 31-20. Like, I don't think it'll be particularly close, but I think Wisconsin needs this is kind of sad to say, but they just need like not get smoked here and to show that their fans, that their team, that they can compete when they're outmatched. Because let's be real, they're going to be outmatched more times than not the rest of the way. And the way that you upset teams is you keep it close and then you pick it off late. And if they have any chance here, that's how they're going to have to do it. But I don't think it'll be particularly close. Maybe they score late to cover, but 16 is a lot. And I would not advise going with USC. Then we go to the night games, Joe. We got 3 here. 7 o'clock on Peacock. Ohio State goes to East Lansing to play Michigan State. They're coming off of a tough loss. Michigan State. Ohio State has a ton of big games ahead. Potential to overlook this one here for the Buckeyes?
Probably not. This is the first time Ohio State's played someone, I'll call it video game relevant. People will play as Michigan State in a video game. I doubt many people are playing as Marshall, Western Michigan, or Akron unless there's some kind of personal connection or you're on like that My Career mode or whatnot. So I think this is a game where Aiden Childs, I think he's going to have to play make, but unfortunately in doing that, he's going to make some mistakes, and that's not really an insult to him. I think a lot of quarterbacks are going to make mistakes against this Ohio State defense, whether it's Igbenussid, Caleb Downs, Jack Sawyer, JT Tulamuluau. The first 2 guys I named are guys that'll pick you off. The next 2 guys are going to be guys that are going to make you throw that ball or, God forbid, throw you into the ground. So I think Michigan State certainly has their hands full. Since 2019, I think this game has been over and out by halftime. I believe 19, they lost by 24, 20 by like 45 or 50. 21, it was that infamous 49-0 at halftime. 22 and 23 were a little better, but not much. It's hard to get much worse than 49-0 at halftime. Spread's 24, Sean. Over-under's 48.5. I think Ohio State actually does cover that. I think they show that they show the Big Ten that they're coming for a vengeance, and that this is it's not been one of the Ohio State teams talked about a lot in the national media, and I don't think Ohio State's angry about that. I just think they're angry that their biggest rival the last 3 years has kind of made a mockery of them, and I think they've kind of had enough. So I think they send a message to the rivals, 110 miles. An hour and 10 minutes down south, and they win the game by a score of 45-14.
Yeah, and if you do the math with the total and the spread, 36-12 is the prediction, or thereabouts.
Mhm.
Um, well, I'll say it this way, Joe. You kind of alluded to it already, but if this is not over by halftime, Michigan State's going to have to do some pretty good things, and
Yeah.
Ohio State's going to win this game 99 times out of 100. But if you could be up 24-3, 24-7 at halftime, maybe get your starters off their feet a little bit, as you do have a Iowa, Oregon, Nebraska, Penn State up in your next four. Every snap off might count here. So let's hope, or Ohio State will hope that they go in there, they're efficient early, they snuff out that home crowd, they don't even give them something to believe in, and then they can win this game easily. I don't see it happening any other way than that. So I'll go 47-21. I don't know how they'll get there, but I think it'll be easy for the Buckeyes. Now, 7:30, Joe, Big Ten Saturday night. The only game this week which includes two ranked teams. They had a classic a couple years ago which went into a bunch of overtimes. This is Illinois on the road at Penn State. Luke Altmaier and Brett Bielema with whole new life. They're 4-0. They go into Happy Valley to play Drew Aller and the 3-0 Penn State Nittany Lions. Joe, Penn State is minus 19 here, which my initial reaction was that was a lot. I would be surprised if Illinois wins this game, but this should be one of the best games of the weekend.
Yeah, I don't know what Vegas knows that I don't, because I've watched Illinois the last, like, especially against Kansas, and albeit Kansas has been very underwhelming to say the least. But to go into Lincoln on a Friday night with one of the more charged up environments in recent Nebraska history, to come out of that game, come from behind multiple times in the second half and win, I'm hard pressed to believe, and I know Penn State at night is a whole different animal. I don't care if it's a whiteout or not for a ranked game. That place is going to be rocking. I have a hard time believing Penn State's going to cover that 19. I think Luke Altmaier has completely turned around his career. I think he's to the point where he's a threat, and that Penn State's going to have to account for him, not only in the air, but maybe even on the ground a little. So with that said, I think Andy Kotelnicki, this is his first real test against a Brett Bielema defense, a defense that's very gap sound and a defense that's very disciplined and will not give up a lot of big plays. So should Illinois not give up big plays, which I ultimately think will happen, I don't see this game getting out of hand. I do think Penn State is going to win, but I think it's going to be a lot closer than people think. Over-under's 47.5. I think the game goes a little over that. I think both offenses have their fair share of success for a bit. I think the defenses shine in a more balanced game. Give me the Nittany Lions by a score of 31-23. I think Illinois keeps this very competitive throughout the entire game, and Penn State has to worry about this one to the end. So give me Illinois. Give me Illinois to cover, but Penn State to win by 8.
I do think Illinois will be ready for this game. I think we can say that. They've had two big games already. A sort of rivalry against Kansas. They brought it. They won. And a really tough road environment. Now, this one will be tougher, but a lot of teams haven't played a true tough road game yet, and Illinois has, and they were ready for that one. Extra day of rest with last week's game being on a Friday. I think they'll be ready for this one. I've Penn State in overtime, 37-31 in overtime.
Wow.
All
right, Sean.
I think Illinois is going to stick around. I know I was harsh on them in the preseason, but they're doing a lot of things better than I think anybody thought. And that's how you compete in close games on the road, is you do the things right. You don't turn it over. You don't make stupid penalties, especially pre-snap. And Penn State, I know the crowd will be there for the Nittany Lions, but they haven't played anybody that good yet. They did easily went on the road at West Virginia. They did almost stub their toe against Bowling Green, and they had a bye week. They did beat Kent 56-0, but I think Illinois, it's like a week 3 team in the NFL playing a week 1 team. I think it might take Penn State a little bit of time to maybe get acclimated to the big environment, and I think Illinois will at least stick around and make this thing a game. I do think Penn State will win it, though. They are the better team. I don't know if Luke Altmaier can play well enough to overcome that, but this should be a good one. And this game will happen before we pick where we have Illinois. We're going to have Penn State near the top, that's for sure, and I think we'll probably have Illinois in the top half as well, even if they do get blitzed 40-10 here or something like that. But All right, last game, Joe, on the docket for Saturday. We're going out west. 11 p.m. Eastern Time on Fox. Oregon goes on the road to UCLA. The Ducks are 3-0 after two pretty lackluster Week 1 and Week 2 wins. They did beat Oregon State by 35 in Week 3. Off week last week, but they are going down for their first Big Ten game against a familiar opponent. They are 25.5-point favorites on the road. Now, considering what UCLA did last week, that is certainly a lot in my mind. But Oregon, if they're as good as we think they are, if they want to win this conference, they have to win this game handily.
Yeah, I think they have to throttle UCLA if they want any shot to contend with an Ohio State. Because let's face it, Sean, Ohio State's been the only real formidable Big Ten team at this point. Penn State's shown glimpses of greatness and glimpses of horror. So judgment's out on that. Judgment's not certainly out on them quite yet. So in this game, Sean, Oregon's just got to keep it simple. Run the ball. Defensively, Ethan Garbers is not going to take the top off your defense. It's going to just be about being disciplined enough to not let UCLA do anything drastic. Because if UCLA goes, 12 to 15 plays on you and scores, you got on a consistent basis, you got a lot bigger problems than you think, which I don't think Oregon will have. So I think Oregon wins this game about 38-10. I think it's not that close. I think Oregon also squanders some opportunities that could make it more of a blowout. But give me the Ducks 38-10, and I do think they get rolling before their inevitable October 12th matchup with the Ohio State Buckeyes.
Yep, I got 40-10, Joe. This is their first Big Ten game, but it's against a familiar opponent. They outmatch UCLA in every single position that I can think of, and it is at the Rose Bowl. UCLA has had trouble getting fans there so far this year. Now, they shouldn't for this game, but if this is anything else other than 25+, I think that will be shocking to all of us. Considering UCLA they were tied on the road in Baton Rouge last week. It's not totally out of the question that it's 20-17 at halftime or something like that, but Oregon's better than LSU, and this is familiar territory for the Ducks, so I have them by a lot as well. All right, that's all the games for Week 5, Joe. We will get to those next week. We are going to do our Power Rankings episode 2 as we get back into the 2 days a week things. We'll power rank all of our teams 1 through 18, all the quarterbacks, and then if we really want to, we can do the coaches as well. But definitely the teams and the quarterbacks, and then we are starting hoops as well soon. Schedules are out. We're going to start the conference previews soon. We have changed the name of the YouTube account just to Sports Daily Media Network, since there's basketball and football stuff on here and maybe some other things coming soon. But everything's going to be the same. Just check the playlists, whether it's In a Nutshell or the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. But until next